Hi everyone, my name's Fern and today I'm going to be talking about how I got an A star in my exam project at our A level. My board for A level was AQA, which meant I was doing fine art, and we got given the exam paper, which I have here, on the first Monday of February. However, our school broke up by the 19th of March, which meant we only had 6 weeks or less than to do our exam project, which meant that we had 7 weeks less than everybody else. Obviously everyone was in the same boat this year because of the pandemic, which meant that we didn't actually have to complete our full exam project. We only had to do what we'd done during school time. This means that it actually hasn't been moderated because I haven't had my result today this year. However, it's been centre assessed and it's a good few marks into an A star, and so are my project 1 and 2, which make up the entire A level as a whole. So holistically, I'm pretty safe in the A star grade boundary, but obviously things could change. Everything's a bit up in the air at the minute, so I will update everyone and put in the description below when I do get my results, just to confirm that it was an A star. This is actually my first ever proper YouTube video, so if you enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe below. I would really appreciate it, and without further ado, let's show you what I did. So here I am with my art book. As you can see, I've left the front cover plain apart from the vital information that you need to provide, which I've covered up, which is just my centre number and my full name and my school. I always leave the front of my sketchbooks plain just because no matter what you decorate it with, it doesn't go towards your final grade, so realistically it's a waste of time, and I also think it can sometimes look a bit GCSE style, so I think it's a lot nicer just to leave the front cover plain. So as we delve into my project, I always start off with my prior work statement. So when I start my A level, I like to reflect on my GCSE course. Project 2, I reflect on project 1, and for my exam project, I reflect on both project 1 and 2 to see what I've learned and what I'm going to take forward. And I think this is really important to get your evaluative marks. Then I started because with my project 1 and 2, I had complete free rein on the subjects that I chose. However, for my exam project, I got given an exam pamphlet with different topics that I had to choose from. So I created this page with all of them in, and I gave a hint to the examiner about the subjects that I wanted to study in more detail. So as you can see, I've just taken these 2 pages, which is microbiology and assembled, and I've created a larger mind map, really honing in on the different ideas that I'd like to develop within them. Next, I decided to go even further and develop them a bit more, so I experimented with a bit of texture here, and I also looked at the assigned artists that they gave us, or the suggested artists that they gave us within the list, because sometimes it's a lot easier to look at the work that you're going to be doing visually rather than just writing about it. However, I wasn't completely sold on the subject of microbiology at this point, so I also did the same for assembled. Again, I had a visual mind map over here and annotations. Of course, it's really important to annotate absolutely everything as you go along. So then I consolidated what I've done so far with a statement of intent, which decided that the elements that I liked from my visual mind map of microbiology were actually the ways that they were assembled and the patterns and the textures. So I would combine this and move on forward with assembled. However, because I wasn't starting my assembled project from scratch here, I could hone in a bit more and look at identity. And this is because in my project 1 and 2, something that I really felt strongly about was portraiture, and that I felt my strength was there. So in my exam project, where I know I've only got a limited amount of time, I definitely recommend sticking to your strengths and what you know. Then this is my first artist. So I just did an analysis here. This is all very personal to me, so I think only the first sentence actually describes his work, and then the rest of it is how I'm going to use it. I then bullet pointed here his key attributes and what I want to take forward, as well as the visual mind map, because I find having a visual layout of the artist is a lot more helpful in terms of your development than just writing and writing and writing. So I knew from looking at his pictures that I'd need to assemble a lot of different photos together to layer a face or an identity. So I started off by taking a load of photos of one of my friends, and then these are my 6 favourites, which I annotated to show evaluation. But I then felt that identity wasn't enough to just take photos of someone, so I took a brief interview with the subject, and just to find out why he posed in the way he did, and what he thought of the photos. As a primary response, I did this oil painting. It was on board about this big, and evaluated it. I did the face in colour and the back in black and grey, just to see which kind of style I'd like to move forward instead of having to do one of each. I was able to save time and combine them in one. From these I was able to then go forward and play around with my favourite photos, layering them, evaluating of course as I go along, and this was the one I decided to move forward with. Then it was time for a bit of media development, because I realised that I hadn't experimented very strenuously throughout what I've done so far. So I decided to do this. This was really quick and easy. It was just etching this into this plastic and then printing it 4 times over. I decided to experiment with highlighting some of the different abstract areas, adding a bit of tone, and moving forward from this, I developed it even further using charcoal and an evaluation, and an acrylic response with an evaluation. And I often find that using the exact same reference photo in the same medium, 1, provides a direct comparison between the 2 different mediums, so you can create more informed evaluations, and 2, if this is a photo that you're going to use for your final piece, by the time it gets round to your final piece you'll be a lot more confident with it. So the hair I could try in 2 different styles, the eye placements and the form I was a lot more comfortable with because I'd already done it twice in different mediums. Then this was the final piece that I came out with. This was about 1 metre high, I would say, so it was quite a large final piece. It only took about 2 days, just because I find it very easy to work in black and white because you don't have to constantly be mixing colours, so that's another tip. I definitely recommend in oil paint trying out black and white, just because for me it saved a lot of time. And then there's a close-up here because it's really about identity, so I wanted to hone in on the different fragments of himself. I then decided, however, looking at this, that identity can be a lot more colourful and informative and descriptive, so I wanted to move on with my theme of assembling identity but using colour. So at this point I decided that I wanted to use colour to inform emotion, so I took a contact sheet of loads of different emotions, which I described as exploring heightened emotions because they're very stereotypical, and then I did a brief, I think this took me maybe an hour to draw, portrait in colour, and this was my first colour portrait so far. So as you can see, I'm using my media to describe the process of my piece. Then I did a bit of contextual research looking at some artists. I began to study the way in which we can use colour and its associations to explore emotion and how we could create attitude or feeling with the audience. I didn't feel like the last page conveyed this enough, so I put it into a big mind map here. And then again, this was just some media experimentation, so I used pro markers, which I feel quite comfortable with, and then I also pushed myself out of my comfort zone and used some oil pastels. I really don't like these, but my art teacher told me to leave them in just because they filled up space and it very easily conveys what I'm trying to do with colour. So moving forward with that colour, I decided to choose Julian Opie as my next artist, who uses very flat, bold colours, which I thought was perfect. This was a response that I did to him here. So I then used my reference photo. I took an outline here, I drew him out. Then, to save time again, I didn't draw all of these individually. I scanned this in, reduced it by I think 75% of its original size, and then printed that 3 times, so the outlines are actually photocopied. Then I used his original colours, his obviously his emotion here is happiness, so I used yellow to depict that. And then I started adding in some depth and some light and darkness, which used my own style. I prefer three-dimensional pieces, but still with reference to Julia and Opie with the outlines and the colour. I then developed this further using oil pastel again and some more pro markers to try and really develop the style and understand the style that I was going to move forward with. And I also filtered all of my reference photos just so that they'd be easier to work from. You really don't need a high level of Photoshop or anything like that. I actually did these on Word. I can't use technology to save my life. And then I really wanted to make sure that my project was holistic as I went through, so I then referred back to my first artist, Draxler, and was looking about how I could use this colour and use what I'd learnt from Opie in the form of Draxler. I then tried to conceptualise my piece because it's very important that you convey a meaning behind it and that you've really thought about what your piece means and what it tries to convey. So this one here is about a front of happiness, but when you chip away you can see sadness and anger and hidden emotions that aren't socially encouraged to be in the limelight. And then competitive emotion here because I wanted to look more at assembly and the way that a person's made up of multiple different emotions and that makes up a personality, and that you can't just be one emotion all the time. I couldn't actually decide between these two concepts, so I brought them forward here. This is my pro marker response to the original and the second one here about competitive, and I decided that once I'd scaled them out, this one was a lot more cohesive, so I went forward with that. So this is my large scale piece in direct response to the pro marker trial that I did before. This final piece was actually massive. I think it was over 2 meters tall. And again, I've just focused in on the facial features because I think they really encapsulate the message that I'm trying to get across in terms of emotion and assembly and identity. So an evaluation here. I always handwrite my evaluations, however at this point I'd kind of realised that I didn't have enough time to do that, and if I had it typed up as a trial I should just print it off and stick it in. So I think it's really good just to have these key subheadings, because if an examiner's thinking that you're lacking a certain part of evaluation, they can literally just look at these subheadings and see what you've written down, what you've got and what you haven't. So from this I decided that this piece scratched the surface on the way that we present polarised emotions, and that only some are acceptable but all make up a person. So I brought this forward using this really amazing portrait that I absolutely love, about how there are direct polarisations between the emotions, but together they make one portrait and one identity. So I decided to move forward with this concept. And again, drawing on work that I'd already done, because there's no need to make a load of work for yourself. I used the contact sheet that I'd already stuck in my book and took different photos and tried to draw them all together. Again, this was done on Word. This was my most successful image from this page in my opinion, because it complemented the artist most strongly. And then I also did some more because I wasn't too sure on the ones that I liked as I was printing them out. And I also liked this one just because of the direct contrast between the emotions. Again, I think it's really good to draw out some of the reference photos that you're thinking of using, just to see how you feel as you're creating them and if you're comfortable with the forms that you're drawing. So I chose my two favourites in just coloured pencil, and I decided that this one was a lot stronger just because it conveyed more emotions than this one did and really encapsulated both the theme of assembly and complemented the artist most strongly. And that was all I had enough time for. So that was about 5.5 weeks of A-level art exam project. I would have still had about 7 weeks left until my exam completely finished. So that's just a taster of what the exam project could have been, unfortunately. As I said at the start of this video, this is my first ever YouTube video. I'd love to keep creating more, so if you've got any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will see you next video. Thanks for watching.